Per my review of the game, I had a lot of fun with the new Saints Row, but there were elements of the story that could have been fleshed out more for a better experience, narrative wise. But I kept thinking afterward, would that have been all? If the story that was presented to us sat more fleshed out, would the outcome be better? The answer is yes, because it was already halfway there. Now, when it comes to video games, a lot of people don't get that video games can have themes. Any piece of media can have themes, whether you intend for it or not, because that's just how it is. We as humans are always pondering the meaning of our lives and the things that happen to it. So it just makes sense for the art we create. Video games is no different, no matter what some right-winger masking as an apolitical person tries to tell you. I say all this to say that Saints Row also has themes. It can be easy to forget that, considering its status as GTA's chaotic gay cousin who shows up to the family functions to do the absolute most. From my perspective, there are two key themes when it comes to Saints Row as a whole that really sell the story. When they're together, they put in the work, but one on its own makes the story feel flat. Regardless of how you feel about Saints Row 4, it still had remnants of this. Saints Row 3, not so much. On one end, you have the Saints being like a wolf pack, a community, a village. Notice how despite their giant differences in personality and own personal codes, you never catch a Saint killing another Saint. I mentioned this in my Reboot review, but there's a compassion between the Saints that just isn't there for anyone who isn't a Saint minus associates. Of course, someone could bring up Julius attempting to kill the boss in the first game, but by that point in the game, Julius had already renounced himself as a Saint. The only time violence is inflicted on Saints by other Saints is through canonization, so Saints Row emphasizes the importance of community. Of course, the Saints aren't, well, actual Saints. They deal in the same things as other gangs: prostitution, drugs, racketeering, you name it. Like I said, it's the compassion they have for each other that matters to the narrative. This is in the reboot. In fact, there's a much heavier emphasis on it compared to previous games. Say what you will about it, but the power of friendship is powerful for a reason. When Saints stick together, they reach heights never thought to be possible. When a Saint betrays them, that Saint gets left in the dust. 6 feet under. I'm glad that this theme is still present and more fleshed out in the reboot. That does leave the other theme out to dry though. Honestly, I feel like it's the most important theme when it comes to Saints Row. Technically, all crime games have this theme, but for me, it's hard not to notice it with Saints Row because I love it so much. And that's the theme centering on the cycle of violence. Obviously, it's more exaggerated, but that's just video games. Going from the OG timeline, from 1 to 4, the cycle is a giant snowball that keeps getting bigger and bigger. Saints Row 1 and 2 showcase it best though. Let's start off with this. The Carnales have an iron grip on Sunnyvale, and Julius and Ben King don't like that. So they form the Vice Kings to protect the community from the Carnales, using violence to solve violence. Now there's Carnales rolling around, and there's the Vice Kings. Not to mention, now the Rollers are coming into town. Cops are barely doing anything about it because they're too busy being on Vice King payroll. The cops are also violent and don't really care about civilian casualties except for when you're holding someone hostage. The cops' presence in the story of just being there says a lot. So now it's just more violence. You can't even get coochie on the sidewalk. So Julius starts the Saints. Gotta clean the streets with more violence. Of course, Julius's reasonings are mostly that it's the necessary evil. Now at this point, it's important to point out that even in the first 2 games, the effects are more in the background. This helps Saints Row keep its semi-serious, goofy persona up. It's like a pride parade. It's fun, it's exhilarating, you forget all of the problems of the world. But when it's all said and done, you have to go back to your corners of the world or the country, back to whatever bullshit you gotta deal with on a daily basis. And really, it's in this winding down that you're left contemplating life. In these moments where you're calm, you reflect on how you're affecting the game's world from a narrative and mechanical sense. Like how the NPCs will say stuff relevant to what happened. Like the mission where Aisha's sister gets kidnapped in an attempt to traffic her, and you do save her. But you're also participating in the same thing as an activity. The end of the first game, you didn't stop any type of violence. You just put a purple paint job on it. You cleaned up nothing. Side note, can we talk about how Julius, in an attempt to clean the streets, recruited 2 of the most willing to kill he could find, and he thought that was gonna go well. Julius doomed Stillwater to more violence by the presence of Johnny and the boss. Let's skip to Saints Row 2 with the best example, Shivington. When you burn the Somnity's drug labs, you're not just smoking out the competition, you've doomed the people that live there. It's clear as day, but you don't really stop and think about it at that moment. And then when you do, it's like, damn. Because between the gang violence and Ultor leaving the poor to fend for themselves, these people are trapped, and you are partly responsible. I say partly because the Somnities are the ones that built the drug labs there, but you are the one that lit the flames. Of course, you're not solely left to blame. Other characters can contribute. We touched on Julius, but let's nibble on another character. Johnny, for instance. His penchant for violence causes him to kill the Ronin in Aisha's house, meaning he's stuck cleaning it, which leads to Junichi finding where Aisha lives and eventually leads to her death. Obviously, Johnny couldn't have predicted that the roads would lead to hell, but it is the consequences of violent brashness. Had they just tied Homeboy up and taken him to some unmarked location and killed there, this could have been prevented. Alternatively, however, Junichi still could have just followed Johnny to Aisha's house. Regardless, she's doomed because Johnny's near her. This is a part of the cycle, innocent lives being endangered. This is also why ride or die culture is bad. Jumping back to Saints Row 1, where Julius blows up the alderman's boat with the boss on it, once again Julius is displaying that he only knows how to get rid of violent threats with more violence. Which, fair enough, but in turn it leaves the city worse for wear. Ultor swoops in, getting ready for their plans to fully gentrify Stillwater. Not only that, but with the Saints scattered with no real leadership, other gangs swoop in. And these guys give off the aura of being more unhinged and more dangerous than the last 3 gangs. So who else is a victim of violence begetting violence? Carlos. Carlos was not lieutenant material. He needed baby steps, and my baby girl was tossed onto crooked ass steps. Now look at him. Dead. You know who else suffers? The homeless folks we kick out of the new HQ. Down there fighting for their lives for their homeless camp, and here come 2 gun-toting criminals to kick them out. And it keeps going in this series. These actions are what makes the Saints' celebrity status in the 3rd game really terrifying, actually. Think about it, there are parents in this universe buying their kids merchandise of people who contribute to most of our country's problems. But then again, they wouldn't be up there alone. And it keeps going in the series. Of course, as an action game involving guns and shit, shitty bang bang is how you solve problems. But the remnants are very present. These reflective moments where you realize just how much blood is being shedded. Again, these are background observations that flesh out the series. It could also be that this was never an intended theme. But we're not talking about that, that's not fun. Now, let's get to the reboot, where there is a sufficient lacking in that area. The story feels so lacking to me because it's missing all of what I just said. Even in areas where you think something more would be done, it falls flat. Like when the idols threatened to blow up the Santo Eleso sign with Kevin on it. Imagine if we saved Kevin but not the sign. Imagine if the city entered a partnership with Marshall, giving Marshall more leeway to enable martial law. And this gets pushed back from citizens, and this leads to a whole thing in itself where the Saints are upheld as faulty revolutionaries, and in turn pisses off the idols who stake that claim, and now they want blood. I suggested this in my review, but imagine the citizens being affected by the toxic waste. Just showcase the events affecting folks, even if it's subtle and not going to be really touched on until the next game, especially when it comes to the main cast. The best we get is Eli wanting to learn how to shoot, which I do love, but a wise woman once asked,
"Where's the flavor? Where's the flavor in this? I don't taste anything."
I'm not gonna say it feels barren because Steelport takes the crown for that, but it's so underdressed. Despite what unfolds in the story, the stakes never really feel high. A major part of that being that nothing feels consequential in this world or the narrative at large. Having said all that, there's this part of me that feels like it's too harsh and judgmental. Like I'm half expecting the same lengthy storytelling across the games that gave us Shandi's full story. I want to allow grace, and I will because honestly, it doesn't even hurt. But the mere fact that it feels like we missed out on stuff like how we did with Saints Row 3 is low-key haunting. I would have preferred if the game was given more time. more time to fix the bugs, more time to flesh out the story the way it was intended, all of that. But we live in an era where the devs of these games aren't the ones that make that final call, but they are the ones the blame falls on most of the time. But what keeps me hopeful for a sequel is just how Saints Row 1 was a good foundation, and Saints Row 2 built off from there in the best way. I'm hoping for the same thing with a reboot sequel. Is it optimistic? Yeah, but if I gotta choose between being irrationally angry on the internet or going to rub one out and then treating myself to some Oreos and milk, who am I to deny myself the pleasures of both the flesh and sweets? I don't even know what this dude rolled into. What the fuck? Bye, I guess. Later.
She's calculated. I'm fucking clueless. Chaotic, stupid. I'll get used to feeling useless. Is there a way for me to kill a girl I wish I were? Won't let me be because I'll never be enough for her. And I know part of me she never stays too far from me. She tastes like me. She tastes like blood. She tastes.
Damn. Okay. Fucking ninja cat. Hi. Boop. Can I boop your nose? But what keeps me... Don't you dare touch my water. Shit. Now I gotta hold this shit like a wine mom because you can't be trusted.